So they weren't kidding when they said the lights are warm, let's just say. But I will try to make this as efficient and quick as possible. Now, how do I move my slides forward? There they are. To introduce myself, as you mentioned, VP Product Marketing Sales Enablement with EIS. Don't worry, I won't bore you too much with EIS. As a matter of fact, this talk has nothing to do with EIS, but just as a reference point, it's a software company for the insurance sector. Complicated software, takes a long time to develop, takes a long time to implement. I used to be in a much more dynamic environment, smaller ticket item, but much greater volume. The reason I'm talking about this topic today is really for two points. One, as I took on this new role, so I started out 6 months ago, I was asked, how do we scale the product marketing function? And very quickly you have to sort of realize, well, there's tools and there's people you need to balance out. And I had to go through a process of how do I justify the investment. So I presented a 3-year investment plan, and by doing that, I had to come up with my own framework on how to actually explain the reasons for why you should be investing. 2, and this is really when you look outside, the growth in specific product marketing technology. I have been, for the last 3-4 months, been bombarded every 2 weeks. There's another vendor coming to contact me, asking me to do some persona-based research, and kind of bring those two things together. I think it's really exciting that in product marketing, there's now dedicated technology, a dedicated tech stack. And so what I want to talk about today is how do you choose what tools to utilize and in which order? And so that slide is correct. First thing to bear in mind is a little bit of context around when you speak of tools, you have to bear 3 things in mind. There is the specific tool, which someone has to operate. That's the people dimension. A tool can replace a person, but doesn't have to. It is perfectly legitimate to have people doing the work. Competitive intelligence, for example, comes to mind. I've always worked on the basis that a qualified CI person can probably handle, through human intelligence, about 8 competitors. When it goes beyond that, you either need to invest more people or you need to have some kind of tool that helps you out to get to the next stage. But the 3 things to consider here are, do you have a process in place? No point in buying technology without a process. For example, recently bought a sales enablement tool. There was a process in place for how to enable the sales team, how to talk to them. You have to think through, how do you get the content into their hands? Does it fit into the workflow they have? If it is a highly distributed organization, highly distributed team, there's the issue of how do you get it in front of them? So point here is really think through how people, process, and technology combine together. I have a slightly different slide set here, but I have to check. That's the one I wanted to show. And so the first part here is I had to sort of think through what is product marketing. And I think there is 4 frameworks that you can borrow from in order to explain what product marketing does. So the first one here is the demand funnel. This is actually called a bow tie funnel, but essentially it's sort of that reverse pyramid where you go from top of the funnel to bottom of the funnel. Very helpful when you're trying to explain to sales teams, marketing someone as well, what product marketing does, because you can identify tools, people, according to the right stages of growth that you're trying to impact. Next one, adoption curve. Not sure how many people, as a matter of fact, how many people bought the Product Marketing Alliance book? They published a book. I've bought it, couple of hands here. So Product Marketing Alliance has sort of organized their book around that product adoption curve. It really is very good for when you're having to have a strategic discussion around how many tools you're trying to invest for the future and sort of why you get the investment from private equity companies and so forth. Found it very helpful. But that's the second area that you can look into. Inbound, outbound, I've heard a couple of times you mentioned over the last few days. I find it very helpful for very specific tactical tools that you're trying to get. One thing to bear in mind is not all tools fall in one category or the other. For example, analyst relations is a bit of both. So there's an inbound element to it in the sense of you have to take the information analysts provide you and try to put it into the roadmap. There's an outbound element. You're trying to influence analysts what your product is all about. And then the fourth one here, product lifecycle. So this is really taking it from a early on development stage all the way through to the adoption, to the customer marketing. This particular framework is the one that Serious Decision came up with, but there are plenty of other ones. Personally, I like to use a mix of the product lifecycle and the demand funnel. Depending on who I'm speaking to, demand funnel, very useful for sales and marketing discussions. Product lifecycle, very useful for discussions with the product management team, subject to what are you trying to do, launch a new product, get more efficiencies in place. So context matters here as well. And first poll coming up. So if you could change to the poll slide. I made a bit of a boo-boo. I came up with my own Slido, but used the official one by the Product Marketing Alliance, which is, I believe, PMMSF. Do not use that one. And it's not a right or wrong answer. I'm just interested to see what kind of framework you guys tend to utilize in your own environments. And now I'm going to have to guess. Oh, there it is, inbound, outbound. Maybe I can ask our chairwoman, what do you think we should be focusing on? What do you guys use at Google?
So we use, well, Google is a huge company, so probably we use all of these things at different points. But within my product area, we most often use product lifecycle and demand funnel.
Yeah, same. And the audience says, well, predominantly demand funnel, which is quite common for product marketing function that supports the sort of sales cycle, the marketing cycle, so a bit more on the outbound side of the equation. And interesting to see that inbound, outbound is towards the bottom. Anyways, moving on. Another thing to think about is someone yesterday talked about how do you measure product marketing, what are sort of the key KPIs. When I went through the cycle of trying to identify which tool I wanted to buy, I was thinking about which are the KPIs that really matter to me. And here's just sort of a list of 7. These are not right. It sort of depends on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to influence. But maybe one here that sort of, to me, stood out, sales velocity. That's actually someone that's one that I really had to try to influence the best I could. And when it comes to sales velocity, it essentially means how do you sell the same amount in a shorter time frame? Ideal for a sales enablement tool, because you can get the content out quicker, you can inform your sales teams a little bit more efficiently. So whenever you buy a tool, think about the framework, but also think about operationally, which KPI is it going to be supporting? Because over time, it's going to be quite challenging to justify an investment when the measurement of it is going to be completely separate. The other element is organizational fit. And here sort of think about 2 things. How important is the objective you're trying to achieve, and how competent are you at it in the first place? This is actually not that easy to do because you have to be sort of reflective and a bit vulnerable in terms of identifying what am I actually not good at. 2 schools of thought: if I'm not good at it, outsource it, or if I am good at it, invest it. Personally believe if it is important, and if you are good at it, invest it because you'll be looking pretty good in front of your peers. On the reverse, if it's not important, and you're not competent at it, then try to get rid of it, divest out of it. One other thing also is outsource partner. Do work with your relative sales, marketing, product partners to help them, to help you work out whether they can essentially benefit from the tool and or do the activities, the process instead of you. Second poll, and this one here is a little bit leading. I'm trying to just get a sense for what kind of money people have available. So the one thing when it comes to tools is, well, at some point you're going to have to pay for this. And so what are your budget levels like? Do you own less than 5% of the budget, less than 10, 15, more than 15? One thing here is people are excluded. So travel, entertainment, people are excluded. It's just the operational budgets that you have available. And again, ignore the Slido hashtag PMA. It's the PMMSF. Interesting to see what the results are coming up to be. How does Google fund its product initiatives? Or go-to-market initiatives, I should say.
Okay, that's definitely confidential, so unfortunately I can't say anything about this.
Fair enough. Looks like less than 5% for the majority of people, which is a bit of a shocker. So you have to be double smart as to what you do with your money. When I did my own research, I think the right amount is about 10%. Again, this excludes full-time employees. This excludes any travel and entertainment. And that's kind of the trade-off that you have to make. Do you buy a tool? Do you invest into a person? If you own content, add on additional 5%. So in a previous job, I used to own content, and that sort of expands the budget to be about 15%. This particular area here is all about constructing and building out the business case. So obviously, having less than 5%, you have to be super smart on what you do with the money that you have available. And here, the only way you're going to move forward is by thinking big, 10x. So when you stand in front of a CMO, CFO, speaking to your VP, and you go up to them and say, hey, I'd like to spend 1,000 and we'll get 2,000. That's not an interesting discussion to have. Because the person that holds the budget is going to say immediately, well, the 2,000 or the 1,000 can spend on something else. But when you have a 10x element in it, it really changes the dynamic of the entire conversation. Basically, spend 100,000 and I can give you $1 million. That becomes an interesting discussion to have. And so if there's one thing that you take away from this particular session, think 10x. There's a way of getting there, so I'll cover that in the next slide. One thing to point out here as well is it's a little bit unusual for product marketing to lead discussions as to investing in, wider terminology, MarTech stack, PMM stack, because it's typically owned by marketing operations. And really your competition for the dollars with the CMO, with the CFO, whomever you need to go for the budget, is going to be the Marcoms, or the marketing operations organization. Sometimes falls under demand, depends how your organization is set up. But either way, pay attention to that, because they'll be asking for money as well. Partner, that's sort of my path forward. I partner for some of the investment I had to make with that organization. And then obviously, there are typical buckets of budget that people are familiar with: AR, competitive intelligence, sales enablement. So the more you can align your spend with sort of commonly accepted buckets, especially vis-a-vis the CFO, works extremely well. So that's Think 10x and Talk 10x. One thing that is a really helpful skill to have as a product marketer is the sort of narrative storytelling exercise. And one of the core modules the PMA has is actually on, I think it's called narrative design. I'm not sure anyone's here, but I personally did not take it. I know one of my mentees did take it. She said it was fantastic. And it's really applying the same skill set to justifying budgets internally at your organization. Many frameworks exist. This is the one I recently used. It essentially goes more or less like this. I was trying to connect emotionally with my CFO. I was looking to spend a substantial amount of money, and I know that I was going to delivering a lot of results. No point in taking an Excel spreadsheet and showing him, put in this, put that. Numbers are always relative, and CFOs have seen plenty of give me X and get Y, and it never works out. But if you do connect emotionally with them, tell them a story that's very relevant, they're more likely to be listening to you. Again, 10x perspective. And so I always like to provide the inspiration. I heard a CEO speak, I heard a sports person speak. In this case, a person is really into football, so I used Bill Belichick and actually researched what Bill Belichick had to say. So I provided that as a narrative example. I then went back to sales and say, hey, does this make sense to you? Can you give me validation that this direction is the right one? And they came back to say, yes, indeed, customers have said this, prospects have talked about these sort of things. And that provided me with both, here's my inspiration, which is sort of how you're trying to get a hook in with the CFO. For me, anyways, that was the decision maker, the CFO. And I also ended up validating in the first place. Next step for me is kind of you have to sort of play with this. Level it up, level it down, make it emotionally interesting, bring it back down to earth. The next step was to bring it back down to earth by talking about imagine if you could change the sort of overall direction of a company. In this particular case, we're trying to have a better investor pitch in place, and it was all about the total addressable market space. So I sort of talked about, what if we could do raising more money, because we're going through a funding cycle, to raise more money based on a much bigger TAM basis. And so that got him really hooked and very interested. Obviously, can't keep 10xing all of the billions that you're always trying to address. But I got to a point where he really started to get very interested in the overall story. And then I tried to sort of bring it back down to earth to say, hey, before we go crazy, how about we sort of go through a steady process, keep it agile, crawling, walking, running, and depending on how many people you have, what your staff levels are like, you can do go a bit faster, go a bit slower. In my case, it ended up being a bit of a crawling exercise, but I ended up getting the money that I was asking for, in particular because I also provided a plan on how to implement this. So this is about 18 months plan, and it sort of showed that yes, we can dream big, but there's also rationality behind how you actually end up getting to the money. Okay, next step is really, now that you've got the budget, you've justified how to get hold of the money, think about a selection process. And one of the interesting things to me is I kind of look at vendors to tell me how to buy their stuff. And it's always interesting to see that none of the vendors tell you how to buy from them. So anyways, I talked to my counterparts in marketing operations to see what they would typically recommend. And these are sort of the 6 steps that we ended up coming up with. Identify the needs. I know this sounds very basic, but when you initially have an idea, you do at some point need to go into specifically like what exactly is out there. And so identify needs here means talk to your partners in product management, in sales, and marketing, and see what they're trying to get out of the tool. Very helpful, because the sooner you build in that partnership into the decision-making process, the more likely you are going to be getting their support when it comes to the latter end of implementing the stuff in the first place. Defining requirements. Usually you would put that a little bit beforehand, but it's what is possible and what is probable. So possible is really what exists out there. Talk to analysts, look at review sites, talk to existing references, people that have done this sort of stuff before, who can tell you this is all that is possible, but you do need to bear in mind what you can do with a probability statement as well. Then you go through establishing the budget. At some point, you do have to go down to specific numbers. And yes, you do have to not just do the storytelling exercise, narrative development. You do have to show some kind of an Excel rationale, especially when you're sort of looking at a more substantial amount. But that just is an indicative amount. I've never been in a situation where a CFO or CMO took it literally that if you spend X, you're going to get Y. It's more the rationale behind what you're trying to do. It's putting numbers behind the story that you're telling. Big element is socializing in the selection process with your partners. Invite them to participate. Invite them to the vendor pitches. There's effort in that as well. So it takes time to organize the vendor pitches. Takes time to review them. Takes time to have some kind of a committee in place that evaluates what you're looking at. The harder selection, to me, has always been about a specific scorecard. I'm on the vendor side as well. I find scorecards very annoying. But the only thing a scorecard does is it doesn't force you to choose, this vendor versus that vendor. The only thing it does is it kind of disqualifies vendors that may not fit your particular needs. You're still left with another 2 or 3 vendors, depending on what you're trying to do. And then you do have to consider things like, well, how much does it actually cost? What are the terms? What's sort of the length that you're trying to subscribe to? All of those things. I also like to go, to the extent possible, into trials, into a reference cycle, depending on how complex it is. Trials, for some reason, are nowadays also harder and harder to come by. But if it is possible, I always like to take someone up on the trial. When it comes to the actual budgetary negotiation, you have sort of natural levers that you can pull. Try to spend a bit more time investing in it. So I don't like 12-month cycles, just because you can barely implement the stuff before you kind of have to evaluate, is it working, is it not working? So I always try to focus on 24 months. It is the amount of time that it takes to really get traction with a sales organization, with change management that needs to be done. Plus, it also gets you somewhat discounts with whatever vendor you're going to go for. Implementation. It's probably where the rubber hits the road. Tools fail in the product marketing area, fail just because the adoption isn't there. So for example, we had a competitive intelligence tool, which the tool itself is fantastic, and my team spent a lot of time implementing, using it, but there was 0 uptake by the sales team. So all the competitive intelligence information that we were sending them, they weren't utilizing. The battle cards, tracking it in terms of what was being looked at, but wasn't getting any traction. So what's the point in having a $50,000 line item on your budget if there's no usage for it in the first place? And lo and behold, as soon as we yanked it, no one complained about the lack of competitive intelligence. It's actually an interesting exercise to go through as well when you need to justify, is it working, is it not working? Yank a tool, switch it off. If people complain, then you can say, okay, it looks like there's some demand for it. If no one's complaining about it, then obviously you don't need it in the first place. Okay. Let's see if this moves forward. As much as we talked about frameworks and sort of organizational decision processes and that 10xing a discussion, there's another dimension that I look at as well. Ultimately, this is one of my sort of personal pet peeves. I do like to try a few things. So I do like to see what tools are out there to see what works. This is a bit of a market map that I developed, and it's really contrasting two things. So two axes here, you have sales and product on the one hand, and these are sort of diametrically opposed tensions, and customer and market. Within that, I have sort of 12 areas of tech that I'm looking at. And one thing that's excluded, by the way, from here are the specific collaboration and productivity tools. So, wikis that you might be using and Slack and those type of things. But these are really more tools to elevate, accelerate the product marketing profession. Tons to talk about, but great stuff that you can do on buyer insight, phenomenal stuff that you can do in pricing. So I don't know how many people here own pricing. I used to own pricing, and there's some really interesting tools that you can utilize there. Data sources, which is sort of the baseline that you need to be thinking about when it comes to sizing and estimating what your TAM, SAM, sums are likely to be. That costs money as well, so depending on where you're in the life cycle, you might have to invest in some of those. I find this particular format very useful because depending on what the organization is trying to do, are we trying to help more sales? Well, it gravitates to one direction. Are we trying to help more market interest? It gravitates to another direction. And given that we have less than 5% of the budget available, helping socialize and coordinate this with the organization is actually quite helpful. And so last poll here from my end, again, it should be PMM SF. Just getting sense for what you guys utilize. Which tool area do you have a preference for? Is it competitive intelligence, sales enablement, content creation, or market intelligence? One thing that always gets ignored is content creation, just because it doesn't have the nice animation, but product marketers produce an awful lot of content, PowerPoints, Word documents, wikis, it's all part of the game. So interesting to see what you guys have to say. Fairly well balanced so far. That's good. Bit of everything. Between sales enablement, market intelligence, competitive intelligence. So it's nice to see good balance here amongst the audience. Getting to the close here. If we can go to the next slide. There you go. I think I probably should also point out some of the tools that I've been utilizing and exploring. A couple different areas. So for those interested in pricing, I highly recommend Conjointly. Even if it's just for a matter of learning about how to do pricing, Conjointly is a research tool. They tell you all of the various pricing models that exist. Conjoint model, hence Conjointly, MaxDiff, Garber-Granger, a couple of other ones that exist. Very, very useful tool. I highly recommend you check that out for your own learning purposes. Another one here is Question Pro, community management. By the way, I have used all of these. I don't get paid by any of them, but this is just my personal feedback. Tribal, super exciting. This is really a real-time buyer insight. So one of the frustrations I've always had with win-loss and competitive intelligence is always looking backwards. Tribal, real-time buyer insight, super exciting tool. SparkToro, I don't know if you know SparkToro, but in my persona development, I always make sure that I include information as to what are people actually searching for online. So to me, persona doesn't just start in terms of when you're putting a contract in front of them, but when you're actually going to Google, hello Google, and putting stuff online. SparkToro is phenomenal at that. I have a problem with content creation. I have to do too much content creation, and the last sort of 2 years, an avalanche of tools that help you create content, whether it's blogs, whether it's little advertising statements you need to do. Writer's one of them. There's another one out there as well, but you can do your own research into that. And so at this point, summarizing a little bit what I went through, if you do need to buy a new tool, you need to make the investment, think about how do you define product marketing in the first place. Again, back to that sort of which frameworks are you trying to utilize. Very helpful to identify how you get the collaboration from other teams. Competence, importance, a good touch point to work out, is it relevant to what you're trying to do? Does align with the metrics that you have to report on? And again, pick your metrics. There's plenty of them to choose from. Obviously, product marketing has to support revenue. So what does it do from a revenue impact perspective? Usually, we don't get involved with cost side of things, but what revenue does it do? And again, come back, can I storytell 10x? Storytell 10x, and if you take one thing away, it's really try to get on top of your narrative development and telling a story. And with that, can we switch to the Q&A?
Yeah, thank you so much, Axel. I loved that slide with the matrix, and I definitely took a lot of notes on what tools we can use. All right, while we wait for the Slido to come up, is there a question in the room? Anyone?
And by the way, if you do want to get hold of me, that's my Twitter handle. It's also my LinkedIn handle. So feel free to reach out. I can give you some of my frameworks in the background. All of them are available.
All right, so it looks like someone in the room wants to know, were there any tools you onboarded that totally went bust?
Luckily, no, but I am being more proactive around ripping out tools when I see there's no traction. I sort of think about not so much, bust is a bit of an extreme sense, but if there's no usage, if there's no benefit to sales, to the product team, what's the point of having resources spending on it? And I try to be more proactive in terms of just eliminating tools that don't make any sense. Hence also, statement around trialing tools. I remember I tried to work with a persona development tool that helped our BDR teams essentially get the personas right in front on the screen as and when they were talking about stuff. And that didn't fully work out. They didn't really see the elevation, so just switched it off after the trial. Oh, wow.
Lots of questions. I like this one. When you evaluate a vendor, how many other solutions do you compare it to? And could you just tell us a little bit about how you end up choosing the vendor you go with?
Yeah, great question. I always take a peek at G2, at Gartner, see what they have to say. I try to keep it limited to sort of a long list of 6, depending on what it is. Quickly whittle it down to a short list of 3 to 4. One of those 4 is usually one I sort of have as not quite relevant to what we're trying to do, but in order to have a bit of leeway, inviting another party, and then really try to go into a deep dive with 3, maybe 4 vendors. There is that inevitable pricing discussion as well in terms of now you got to talk specific budgets. It's always helpful to have one in your back pocket. Personally, I don't believe in sort of option A, option B, and then trying to come back to see which one is going to be asking for the least money. I try to commit more to the value that it provides to the organization. So by the time I'm price negotiating, I usually only have one preferred vendor left.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Axel. In the interest of time, as Axel mentioned, you can catch up with him to ask your question later today or on Twitter as well. Let's give Axel a huge round of applause to say thank you.